have, okay. I hope people are still writing. While people are writing in the chat, maybe I'll do my introduction really quick. So Ted, German citizen. I've lived in the US since 2010. I came here because I was doing a postdoc program for in my previous career, which was linguistics, which was great fun, but I didn't enjoy academia as much. I mean, I enjoyed the learning and the studying. I didn't so much enjoy being trained on shooting other people's ideas down, which is a lot of what it was to me. And then I basically dropped out. I homeschooled my kids for a while. And was looking for something new to do. And during that time, I moved into a co-housing community that was running sociocratically. And that got my attention because it was so different from everything I've seen. And then I got sucked into that. And now I do that all day, every day. I'm one of the co-founders of Sociocracy For All, which is a nonprofit based in the US, but really operating globally with a large Spanish chapter also and other languages. And the idea of Sociocracy For All was that we wanted to give everybody access to sociocracy because, everybody's heard about democracy, sort of, but we wanted to have an equal playing field or level playing field so that people could also hear about the alternatives. And there are good alternatives, sociocracy being one of them. And thank you for all the self-introductions in the chat. All right. So what I'm hearing as what's happening today is I'm going to talk for a while and just explain to you how sociocracy works with a little bit of example, show you around a little, and then we'll stop for questions. And then I think my understanding is that I leave and you guys do an exercise. Try something out. Okay, ready to start? Okay, I will start. So, governance. I always say it's like I would have not assumed that I would become a governance consultant. It did not sound necessarily of something that I would find interesting when I graduated high school. And yet that's what I do. And I find it the most gratifying thing, actually. And the reason that is because typically people see governance, just like I did when I graduated high school, governance is something super boring and abstract and kind of far away from me, right? This is something that people in fancy boardrooms do, and it has to do with the compliance, and it has to do with, I don't know, or, senates and so on, seem far away. And the way I looked at governance now is actually that it is the connection between the people that I want to do something with, the people that are my peers that care about the same thing that I care about, and the project that we do. And governance is kind of the connection in between. So to me, it's something that lives very close to the people. It's kind of ours, right? It's because we need to claim it in order to do what we want to do. So as that, because I care about people and I care about projects, the connection of both, or the connection between the two of them, that's super exciting to me. And typically in a hierarchical setting, what happens is that decisions, so the governance happens away from the people who carry out decisions. So the managers make decisions, right? The workers do the work. That's a hierarchical setting. And in sociocracy, what we do is we make the people who do the work, who carry out the work, the workers, we make them also the decision makers. And that is what sociocracy means, really. It means socios, right? Like in sociology and all of that, those who associate together, those who do stuff together, and they make decisions. So that's also different from democracy. It depends on how you define democracy, but democracy means governance by the masses, right? By voting. So that's also somebody else. But in sociocracy, it's the people in the organization that make decisions, which is great for organizations, and that's what it's designed for. It's a little tricky if one wants to apply it to other things, but we might get there in our Q&A. Now, I think you used the word earlier, was it nodes or working group? The term that is typically used in sociocracy is circle. Has a little bit of a history, but the point of a circle, so a team that works together, is that they do work together. So there's something that they're doing together, right? Because I said that it's the workers that make decisions. So there's also some working, not only managing other people's work as your own work. And then they make decisions together. And they self-organize in terms of, for example, how long are our meetings and how often do we have them, who facilitates us, where do we type our notes, and so on. How do we communicate with each other? So like a self-organized cell. And what makes this more than just a working group is a level of clarity and intentionality that we give it. And that is by giving each circle an aim and a domain. And sometimes they're bunched together into a mandate, which is not wrong, but I really find that I have some appreciation for really seeing them separately, because they are conceptually very close, but also different. And an aim is all the things that you're asked to do, like, for example, publishing an online magazine, or running a community garden, or creating a better space of living together, or sharing sociocracy with the world, right? These are all aims. And domains are all the things that you have authority over, that kind of yours as a circle, that you steward a responsibility for, have authority over. All of these kind of blend together into what we call domain. And if an organization is just one group, then the domain is just everything. And then we don't see it as much. We see it more when we spread out into different groups. And that's what I want to look at real quick. I'm going to go into a concrete example, and I honestly always use the same, but it's a really good one, because in particular, it is relatable. Everybody kind of understands it. So I'm going to pretend that we are building a community garden of, let's say, 40, 50 people, somehow owning a plot of land together and gardening together for the purpose of growing food. And the question is, okay, what would we need to run that? And what we would need is, well, we would need a group that does everything plants. I call them the plants circle. Some of the operations, so some of the work that they do would be ordering seeds. It would be planting plants. It would be maybe harvesting. And maybe they also oversee the watering team, for example. And then we would have another circle. This one could be something like an infrastructure circle. So they might be doing all the, like, these are the builders, not so much the green thumb people, but more the builders, like the tools, the tool shed, the fences, the irrigation system, these things. And then we could have something like a people circle or membership. So it would include membership. The way I'm making this up, okay, this is not the only way of doing it. If you decide to have membership separate from everything else, you can do that. So, but that's, in my example, let's say this is people circle. It's everything that has to do with kind of the people in it, like communication, like inviting people to, like, having the list of members and sending an email every Saturday or something, or inviting people to the work days, making sure everybody has food at the work days. I don't know, organizing childcare for the work days. I don't know, things like that. Maybe they even do the website, for example, because that's kind of a people-facing thing, right? But maybe one would say website is separate. So those are all decisions that one can make about where things live. But now, to keep it simple, let's assume everything has found a place, and we know for everything where it gets decided. So now with these three circles, let's say that that's it for now. We would now have a place for everything. And the cool thing about that is that it's already decentralized, right? There is no boss in the middle that tells everybody what to do. No, instead we have teams that take care of these individual things, and they also are the decision makers. And that's always important to remember, because we're so used to hierarchical systems that we forget that all the time. So if, and I'm going to give you a concrete example, if now there is a decision to only buy organic seeds. That decision can be made here. Oops. Because they are the people who buy the seeds, which means they get to decide that. If they decide to have a membership fee for members, if membership is in their domain, then they can just decide that. If they decide to paint the tool shed pink, if it's in their domain, they get to do that. Again, that's important so we don't start to centralize decision making, because that's always what people try to do, because that's what we've been taught. All right. Now, of course, we do want some connection between the circles. And what happens with that is that we take two people from each of the circles and we put them here into what we call the general circle. The general circle has three things that they do. One is they serve for information flow, right? If, I don't know, let's say they notice that they're totally running out of money and they need thinking about increasing the membership fee, we would hope that the fact that they're running out of money already kind of made it through the organization, so it's not new information. Because the more people know, the better they understand the context for a decision. So knowing more information flow is important. Then the second thing that the general circle does is peer support, right? If we only had those individual teams and they were disconnected from each other, kind of in an insular fashion, then if everybody here argues and hates each other, right, and half of the group walks away, we want that those two people here to be able to go someplace and say, hey, we need help, like we're in big trouble, can you think with us? And of course, there's always the question of what happens if one of them also walks away, but that's something I can get deeply more into if that's of interest. So now we've talked about information flow for general circle, we've talked about peer support, and the third one is the most abstract and also the coolest, as I find, and it is that the general circle decides who designs. What I mean by that is I had said that these groups can make decisions autonomously within their domain. If seed ordering is your domain, that means you're the final decision maker there, right? But now what if we have something that needs deciding where it's not so clear where it should be decided? Then who's going to decide who's going to decide it? So in order to really run effectively, we need some sort of clearinghouse for that then makes these decisions. So if now, let's say, let's use an example. Let's say maybe we don't have a website yet. Okay, so this group has been operating without a website, and now they say, hey, we should have a website because we've talked about this, we want more members, and so on. So let's do that. And now they look at the people that have been holding the mailing list, and they say, ooh, website. Well, we would have to talk about that. And then they look at the plants people, and the plants people say, website, us, we're planting. Like, that's far away from what we do. And then they ask the infrastructure people, and they say, well, no, that's outside of what we do. So now the general circle needs to figure out whether they want to give the people circle the domain of the website. And the way they would do that is in mutual consent. So this, in order to change the aim and domain of this group, the group and the parent need to say yes. So this group needs to say yes, and this group needs to say yes. And that's important in two ways. One is we don't want a situation where something just gets dumped on them, you know, like you're now also doing grant writing and website and I don't know what else, organizing a retreat. And they say, ooh, what? Do we also get to say no? Right, so it has to be consent-based. It has to be mutual consent. And on the other hand, we also don't want a situation where a group can just go rogue and not do half of their stuff. Like, let's say you have an organization where the social media and communications circle decides they don't do social media anymore. They just don't. But they never tell their parent circle, and the parent circle doesn't know it's not getting done. So we need to have that shared understanding, and we need to have alignment about those things. And the way that is manifested in sociocracy is with that mutual consent about the aim and the domain. It can also sometimes happen that there's conflict about who decides what. And in that case, again, it goes to the general circle. Or whoever the parent is, kind of to the next higher circle. In this image, the next higher circle is the general circle. There was one other piece about this that I wanted to say. Oh, the interesting thing about that is also that this is not some other people, right? This is not some kind of leadership council or something, but this is made up of the people who are doing the work. And that's important because I wouldn't want the decision of who decides what to fall onto other people that then are basically the managers that manage, have a say about our work. So the fact that it is actually those people that then get selected up and are the same, like that, the fact that this person is the same person as that person, that is a pretty important design thing to keep the workers and the deciders together and not have it be hierarchized again. Now, it is a good idea to have something like a mission circle, like an advisory board kind of a situation. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it is different from a general circle in that it has a little bit of a different focus. And it's also a good idea to double link that because, of course, long-term strategy should impact operations and operations should impact strategy. So that should go together. A few more things on structure, and then I'm going to go to a different topic here. So this was the infrastructure circle, right? So they do fences, irrigation tools. If now they say, like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them say 7, actually. Right? Is it actually 8? Wow, I miscounted a lot. Anyway, so those people, they now notice, oh, actually half of us don't really care so much about the tool shed. Plus, in the tool shed, there's actually this other person that isn't even here that is actually quite involved in the tool shed stuff. And what they then can do is they form a tool shed circle, or whatever they want to call it, define the aims and domains for that circle, and then they are the final decision makers on the circle, on the tool shed, which is great because now somebody focuses on it that actually cares about the tool shed, and their attention is freed up for things that they care about. So we always try to have a good mapping between the people that care about certain things and are involved in certain things and the domain that their circle is holding, so that we're actually deciding things that we're really involved in and don't become kind of too far away from that topic. But what's interesting about this is that whenever they now pass that on, right now, they are the final decision makers on the tool shed. So if we have like several layers, and I can show you our own organizational structure with like 50 circles and 200 something people, sometimes you have a sub circle that it decides really, really key decisions because we just happen to pass that domain into a very specific circle. Okay. Just a few things on internal things. So the two people that connect the lower circle and the higher circle, or its parent, to keep it kind of in a fractal logic, those have names, leader and delegate. One can also call them whatever else, coordinator, rep, top down, bottom up, I don't care. But the point is that we do want two people, at least most of the time, because the idea is that only one voice between two circles is a little bit of too weak of a link, because then we only hear one perspective, and two perspectives give us a wider sense of what's happening in the other group. And we kind of avoid that sandwich position that sometimes these middle people might be in. With two people, one really has a different situation. We also tend to have a facilitator and a secretary in each circle. That's kind of somewhat obvious. Facilitators can be, but doesn't have to be the same person as the leader. I like separating it actually. And then we define roles for whatever else we need. For example, in our community garden example, we could have one person who is always the person who orders seeds. Like that's our seeds role. That person is always doing the seeds. And that other person is the tomato person, and then another person is the website person and whatever else. mailing this person. So it's a way of clustering kind of something to a smaller level than a circle, because we shouldn't be always dealing with everything in a whole group. It's just super inefficient and typically boring, because if I care about the work days, but not so much about the website, why would I sit there for each and every conversation and task about that? There's a neat little feature that not so little actually, but that I really like, but it's not as super prominent in everyday life, but it shows you a little bit about the logic of it. So these two people here that connect these circles, who decides who is going to be that link between the circles? Because of course that's a key position, right? This is the way of hearing how things are going here and what they're deciding. Given that we've probably given them a lot of power, we would want to hear what's happening there. So what happens is that this person as the delegate would be selected by this group, but also needs to be confirmed by that group. So in order for this person to serve in that role as that link, two sides need to say yes to that. And I will say more about what kind of yes that is, because it's only a consent yes and not a yay. That is, we don't have to be on the same page that this is the best person. It's just like, yeah, this person can serve that, nothing against it. And then depending on the kind of organization, it can be that the leader is actually selected top down and confirmed bottom up, but that is done in many, many different ways. The point is just that it has to be mutual. That's the big thing. And then it leads to a pattern like that. People typically really like this image because it kind of shows how information travels through the organization, because we have these links. So this person here, the delegate of this darker circle, would carry information from this circle into this circle, so that then from there it can spread. And this person here would carry information from here into the circle. And ultimately, you see that some people call this a circular hierarchy. There's no one boss, right? Everything kind of belongs somewhere, and then the information and the decisions kind of flow through the organization. Switching my focus a little bit, I want to talk about meetings and decision-making, because it's also a part of sociocracy that I very much care about, because to me, meetings is where the rubber hits the road. If you can't have a meeting where everybody is heard, then it's all not good for anything, I would say. So listening and psychological safety are really important aspects of a Sociocratic meeting. So this quality of listening, this picture really spoke to me, because it's like, yes, this is what a good Sociocratic meeting looks like or feels like. It's kind of the same sentiment, if that's a good word here. But the way we do that is not only by crossing our fingers and hoping that people will be nice to each other and have everybody speak, but by putting a system in place and saying, if we have a discussion, we're going to talk one by one, and everybody will speak or pass, but everybody will have a chance to speak. So for example, if this person is the facilitator, we would now, let's say somebody has a new idea, and everybody's like, oh, I want to have a response to that. The facilitator will say, okay, let's do a round, because I want to hear what everybody has to say. And might, for example, start here. And then this person says their reaction to the idea, and it goes around. Now the facilitator says their reaction to the idea. And now the round is complete. And these people have spoken. And now maybe we want to make a decision about the idea. Then we would move towards a decision. Or maybe we're still in kind of brainstorm mode, and then we would just do a second round. Or maybe we're out of time, and then we'll say, oh, great, let's write that up and make a decision about it next time. But the building block is always to do rounds, at least a lot of the time. When it's time to make a decision, there are decision-making methods that we're all aware of, like autocratic decision-making. Somebody decides, the boss, but it could also be mom. It could also be the teacher, right? These are all systems we're all very familiar with. We're also very familiar with majority vote. I don't need to say about that. It's just really amazing that it's Of course, it's a huge improvement towards one person or a small group deciding. And yet it also seems a really low bar to say, sure, let's ignore 49% of the people. And then consensus, where typically the way consensus is described is everybody needs to agree. There are modifications of that, often called modified, formal consensus. For example, groups that operate like that might say everybody needs to agree, but if one person is against it, we just still move ahead. In sociocracy, the basic decision-making method is called consent. And the question is not, do you agree? The question is something like, do you think this proposal will work? That's the difference. And I'll tell you what the difference is in two different ways. So a proposal works if it supports the aim. The aim remembers the thing that we're trying to do together, so we know what the aim is. And the aim of the circle becomes the backdrop for everything that we evaluate and say, well, does this proposal support the aim, or is it working against the aim? If it's working against the aim, then I clash here, right? And say, no, actually, I object. If I don't object, that means I consent. And if I consent, it might be because I think that the proposal is the best idea anybody has ever had. Or I might say, I don't know, there's other ideas that I have that might work, but this is a good enough idea. There's no harm created. We can go ahead and try it out. There are two things here that are typically new to people when they've never worked in this way. One is you can say yes to something that wasn't the perfect idea. Because I don't think perfect ideas exist, and people are looking for perfect ideas, knowing or not noticing how you can never get there, and it can lead to this insane paralysis where you don't do a thing because you wanted to get a proposal from 99% to 100%. So this kind of the perfect is the enemy of the good. It's kind of the same logic here. Like, just get something out the door, figure it out, see how it works, and then evaluate it. A slogan that is often used is good enough for now and safe enough to try, which also implies that you're going to revisit it. So it gets better by improving it over time, and not because you want to discuss it for a year before you lift a finger. So the whole, you can say yes to something that isn't perfect is a big deal. The other one is, if you say no, if you object to a proposal in a sociocratic system, in consent, then the reason you're objecting is not because you say, oh, I don't like it, or, you know, I don't know, I'm in a bad mood today, I'm going to say no to everything. But an objection by definition is that you need to at least try and give the reason so other people can understand it, of how the proposal is at odds or is kind of counterproductive compared to the aim. So now if somebody objects, that means they see a reason of how the proposal will negatively impact your capacity to carry out the aim. And I would say if somebody knows a reason of why we would shoot ourselves in the foot with something that we said we would do together, I would want to hear about it, right? And I would not want to move forward with something if somebody clearly sees like, no, that's not going to work, you know, like that's going to be counterproductive. So in this case, an objection is actually not a block or a shooting something down. It's actually something super, super valuable, because somebody who I work with, right, who knows just as much about the work that we do together as I do, sees something that I might have missed. So once one has arrived in that mindset, the first reaction if somebody objects is, well, thank you. Thank you. Because we don't want to make mistakes that are, you know, that are stupid enough that we're going to harm our project. So objections are all of a sudden in the system something positive, and they also become depersonalized because it's about our aim and about our proposals and not about the so-and-so like it or not. It's a whole different question. That's why I tend to never ask, do you like this? I only ask this question because that's all that matters to me. And you will be able to try out the consent process as well. But here, let me be clear on one thing. If a circle has a proposal, everybody needs to consent to it. If one person objects, you need to put in the work on understanding what that person is seeing so that you can integrate whatever they're bringing. You know, maybe they're saying, no, this is too expensive, and then you work on costs and whatever. There's a whole science of that, of how to integrate objections. But the interesting thing is also, if somebody who's not in that circle disagrees with the proposal, they technically cannot object. So not everything has to be fought out with everybody in the organization. We're building these little pods, right, our circles, where they are the people who know about this part of the work, and they're going to make decisions. People from outside might lack the context. We can ask them for input, but we can't have them stop us when we know what we're doing. So there's a strict kind of division between people have a domain and that's where they make decisions, versus you're from the outside, I want to hear your input, but just know that we're going to move ahead in the best way that we know how to do. So it's an interesting way to focus decision making on a group that's small enough that you can actually listen to each other, where deliberation can happen and really every voice is heard, right? Which is simply not possible in a group of 50. So we have a small group, very focused, and then it's, in my experience, it's that focus that opens up the possibility for them to hear and be curious about the outside opinions and bring those in. This is just really quick because you're going to do this and I'm going to say more about that. That's what the exercise is going to be. When there is a proposal on the table, wherever it might come from, we make sure everybody understands it instead of discussing it already based on misunderstandings. Then we do one round where we ask everybody what they think. And then we do a consent round. So here's where we hear all the nuances of, well, I like this and I like that, and here's another thought I have, and so on. And then here the question is yes or no. Do you consent or do you object? And if somebody objects, that's great. Then we just do a little bit of a detour and look at, okay, what is that objection? What are they bringing? What are they noticing that we missed? And then we figure things out and make a new proposal that is slightly amended, and then we send it towards consent again. And we do that until we're done. Oof, I always put the slide in, and each time it surprises me, which is actually by design, because I give a lot of these overviews and I always want something that's a little bit different each time, honestly. So, but recently in the last year or so, it's kind of always been the same thought of what have I been learning? It's that in consent decision making, when I am decision maker on decisions in my circle, it really stirs up this super interesting question about co-responsibility, because we're all so used to not being responsible, actually, or to defer to other people, right? It's so easy to defer to a boss and then complain that they decided. It's also so easy to stand aside and say, oh, I think this is a stupid idea, but you go ahead, you're going to find out that you're wrong. But these are all ways in which we're not really taking responsibility. And sociocracy is really working the other way, because you're going to be asked on all the decision that you're a decision maker on. Everything that is within the domain that you're a part of, you're going to be asked. And if so, now all of a sudden people have to ask themselves, well, am I in on this, or do I see a problem? Am I willing to take responsibility for this if we do this? Or is there any reason not to do this? No, I can't think of any. Okay, I guess then I'm co-responsible. So learning to say yes to things just because there's nothing wrong with it, and knowing that now I'm going to be co-responsible for it because we're the deciders on this, that's unfamiliar, actually, to many people. I know it for sure was for me. So that's interesting. It requires a whole different way of thinking about things, actually. I enjoy it, but it's also sometimes a little exhausting. So I've kind of flipped to wanting to have a lot of, authority and decide things and so on, to now I defer, like I not defer in the sense of somebody else decide, but or like I don't want to be responsible, but how about the people decide that who are in charge of that? I don't need to be asked my permission all the time. Like, just go ahead, do it. Don't ask me. It's all good. So a little bit of decision. Yeah, I'm not short on power, because there's a lot of power to go around when you share it. All right, we're here towards the end. Who uses Sociocracy? Well, all kinds of organizations. I'm bringing you here to intentional communities. You can see they look very different visually, and yet the patterns are all the same. And they might use different words and all of that, but the pattern is always the same of their domains, their decision makers, subdomains. It's all nested, something in the middle that's double linked. That's not shown here, but it's still double linked, and so on and so on. Then what do we have here? This is a nonprofit. This is a school. These are all organizations where they were willing to give me their organizational structure. This was an organization in Canada that I worked with, they were kind of sitting between the town or the city and the people. That was interesting. So they were doing a lot of advocacy and kind of education and communications work. This is a worker co-op running a cafe and restaurant. And I will give you this slide so you can look longer at them. This is my own organization, actually. That's what I wanted. That's what I referenced earlier, the like 50-something circle. I haven't counted in a while. I am this month still, but ending next month, leader of the general circle. And you can see here, there's everything that's bluish is people who are working with sociocracy in other languages. Everything that's orange is people who are working with sociocracy in different sectors, co-op, schools, and so on. And then you see kind of the more production side of things, training, content, outreach, website. Here you see, for example, this is a like sub circle, and it has all the website decisions. That is quite central for our organization. And probably the biggest part of the budget is being decided here. And then also here, kind of just internal support. So that's how this can. This is a little, might not be so interesting for here, but this is a software company for profit that I worked with. And you see, again, it's the same pattern, just because in a way, the same pattern is always because every organization has kind of different activity areas, right, that need to be connected, and all of them need to do some long-term thinking. So that's why the general circle, mission circle, and some department circles is just always the case. Oops. We do a bunch of trainings. We typically divide it up into consent, meetings, structure, and performance. A thing about structure happens this week. We do a bunch of practice things. We always combine things also with some sort of communication support, nonviolent communication being one of them. As soon as people have more responsibility, it's more important for them to be able to know what they even think, and to be able to express what they think, and to hear other people who might think differently in an effective way. Their books. And this one, by the way, might be interesting, especially for people who are starting chapters, because one of the, so this is just a plain kind of reference book for what sociocracy and what are all the different things we need to know. But this one I wrote because I was so tired of a particular effect, and that is that people start a group and they don't put governance in place at the beginning, right? And then what happens is that groups quite often lock themselves out of their own system because they don't decide how things are decided, and then things are messy, right? And then they don't, and then somebody says, well, we should have a governance system, but then we don't have a governance system by which to decide what our governance system should be. And boom, you're locked out of your own system. And it's really hard to get out of that. I mean, I've helped many groups do that, but it's really hard work to get out of that checkmate situation. So a way to start is to lead with that process from the beginning. and to already decide on the first day you meet, to decide what your aim is and decide it together, decide what your decision-making method is. So this book is kind of a roadmap to how to do that, so you can build everything out without locking yourself out. There we are. And I am happy to have questions. And we can just, I don't know how you want to do this. And Noemi, you muted, so I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, I think we can just, use the hand signals and go one after the other. So Nina, maybe you...
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Naomi. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ted. That was really interesting. I just had a question about the roles within the groups, so the leaders and the delegates. How do you kind of ensure that, obviously you've got the system in place where they are crossing over into other groups, but how do you kind of ensure that those roles don't get entrenched and that power doesn't get kind of like locked into the same kind of people? Like, should there be a system in place whereby those roles change, like there's like a term for like a maximum term that someone can serve in that role, and then you have to kind of switch up who becomes the leader like every few months or every year or something?
Mm-hmm. Yes, typically all decisions, even policy decisions, but also selecting people into a role would be on a term, and that gets decided as you select that person. You say, okay, we're going to select this person now for a year or whatever it might be. The one thing that we typically discourage is to make kind of hard rules about how long somebody can be in place, right? Because somebody could, like, for example, in my community, the person who was overseeing buildings and grounds circle has been the leader of that circle for 18 years. Because he's fantastic. Nobody, including himself, but nobody I've heard ever anything but he should please continue in the role because he's absolutely perfect at it. So, you know, then other circles change every year. So the important thing for me is that you don't make an 18-year term, but after 3 years, you know, or whatever term you picked, you again have a process. And when it comes out that that's still the best choice, great. If there's still no objection, you know, that's great. And there is a whole process of selecting people that I skipped over, but you can look at it super quick here. And that you hear, as you said, the term. So you define what is this role, what's important about it, is it still the same, do we want to change it, and so on. What term would we probably want? What is important to us in this kind of role? Like, what does this person need to know or be good at? And then we do a nominations round, and then ultimately the person is decided by consent. So that is the standard for roles if people follow it. Do we just go on to Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Ted, for that. I just had a question about the difference between the leader and the delegate, because they're both interacting with a general circle or the more interlinking circle. And additionally, what explicitly is the role of the leader, and then what's the difference between a leader and a delegate?
Mm-hmm. I was like pointing to something, so I'm screen sharing. So let's have an example. What did we have here? The plant circle, right? So now one of them would be the leader. It doesn't show in this diagram who that would be. So let's assume it's this person, and this person is the delegate. Now the leader would both, it's kind of two things together. It's the linking position and it is overseeing operations in the circle. But so that is very close to what a very, very good manager would do. And by that, I mean making sure everything is happening, but not in a power over way, because decisions are made together, right? So we decide together that everybody, you know, that we're doing this project together and everybody's going to put in 10 hours. So now everybody has consent rights on that. So let's say we all consent, but then one person is not showing up. then it's the leader's job to say, hey, I haven't seen, your 10 hours yet. Are you okay? Is there anything you need? But that's what I mean by holding accountable, making sure everything happens. There's also a little bit of a meta role there. And that is that if something lives, let's say there's a new problem that comes up, okay, and there is no circle meeting anytime soon, and it absolutely needs done because whatever, then it's kind of by default the leader until they can talk and kind of distribute it again. Or that person just asks somebody else to do it. But whatever happens, the leader has to take initiative because we need that circle to be able to act even between meetings. And then, yeah, that's why it's important that we trust the person also. The delegate is basically just that second voice. So it's just the pure linking role. What we want is that if this person says all kinds of stuff about how things are going in the group, we want that second person to be there to hear it here. And typically, actually, we do it that if there's circle reports in the general circle, the delegate speaks first. So we hear their perspective first. And I've had over and over, I've heard people say that they didn't think it made so much of a difference whether a second person is there, right? I'm the leader, you can trust me all, right? I'm just going to say it as it is. Why would I do anything else? And again, people say, wow, having so-and-so sit next to me who was also at our planned circle meeting made a huge difference. And that's kind of the effect that the delegate is going for. Unless you have something in, no, you put your hand down. I take that as complete. Another Jack.
Hi Ted, excellent workshop. Should be quite flattered. I've been on Teams calls all day, but I found that extremely informative and well presented. So thank you. I've actually got loads of questions, but what I'll do is I'll ask one and then go back to the queue so I can let someone else ask a few more because they might answer what I wanted to ask. One of the questions I had was, what happens where a decision sits in between or is a cross-cutting issue across two circles? So the example at the start around membership fees. So if one circle decides that they want to introduce membership fees, that might actually affect a lot of the other circles because it affects the kind of people that might be able to join the organisation. How does that sort of play out? For instance, if I'm in another circle, I actually really disagree with that decision, not just because it's a decision in another circle, but because it actually affects me. How do we negotiate that?
Yeah, very nice question. I like thinking and talking about this. So let's have a specific example. I always like working with specific examples. Yeah, I guess let's say these two groups have a hard time finding volunteers. And now, for diverse, like all the different tasks. And now they, on top of that, have the idea to all of a sudden introduce the membership fee and charge like whatever, 50 euros per month. And everybody else is like, what are you thinking? We're already struggling to find people. Like, how on earth can you do that? Okay. That would be the kind of situation I think you're thinking about. Now, we have to be clear about, so one thing I would never want to water down, and that is, if we say that they are the decision makers on the membership fee, then they are the decision makers on the membership fee. So that I would not touch. But if a circle makes a decision that is so inconsiderate for the wider system, then they didn't do their homework. So that's why it's really important for big decisions to be kind of seasoned a little. And what happens, for example, is that, before making a decision, a circle would send out whatever, some kind of message, depending on what the information system or communication patterns are. But let's say they send a message or they hold a little meeting, like an info session of here are the reasons why we think we can't do without a membership fee or whatever it might be. Or if they say, hey, that might impact how volunteer recruitment works, maybe they're going to talk to the volunteer coordinator in Plant Circle and say like, hey, how would that impact? What do you think? So we need to, so some of you might be familiar with, or maybe not, but some people hear about the advice process, which is kind of thrown around a lot in new forms of working, decentralized working. So it's a basic principle of ask feedback before you do something. And of course, that will never be perfect, right? You might have an impact on something where you didn't know that had impact. You would just thinking you were deciding about a membership fee. You had no idea that it would turn away, volunteers. Let's say that happens. Then ideally, again, we play with that term, because you would make a decision for a certain time period. You can always undo it if you learn new information. But in particular, you evaluate over time. So nothing is ever put in place forever. You always stay on a term so you can see what happens. And it's kind of especially made for kind of decision making in complexity, right? You move something forward and then you see what happens, and then you move it a little further and see what happens. So it's this whole idea of learning from feedback and going in small steps instead of making perfect plans. That's always the idea we come back to. So that's why it's a very alive system, and it also requires a literacy and fluency from people to be able to pull that off.
So is there a way for instance, someone else from another circle to go and sit in on a different circle once in a while and kind of see their decision-making process with feedback?
Yes, we do that sometimes. For example, that you invite somebody deliberately because you're talking about like your interface with this other group, and then you invite their leader, right? Of like, hey, the one thing is that it's actually not so super easy, because I mean, a limiting factor in that is that every circle is kind of on their own trajectory. So having somebody who isn't deep into it can sometimes be very disorienting, actually, for both sides. But there's so many options of what one can do. For example, one can have just the two leaders check in with each other on a regular basis, right? And say like, hey, like there's so much, there's really no end to what kind of opportunities for information flow and understanding each other better one can build into the system. So Sociocracy is somewhat agnostic, but it's so like you can just add these things. There's nothing that tells you not to. That makes a lot of sense that way. Taylor, Jean-Louis.
Me or Noemi?
No, I think Zoom decided that you're next. I think it's the first.
Okay, thanks. I will share another picture now, just to my question is concerning, for example, this could be a very broad picture of the main group that now are working in the Degrowth movement. Probably now the most money decisions are done in the super group. So, and then we have this sort of general assembly. These groups are like to 5 from 10 people groups, But then we have like this general assembly that I don't know, could be between maybe 80 representatives of some group that come, Is how to think this assembly within the different bubbles, Could we think a bubble that is, I don't know, some representative of the General Assembly, or just to leave some voices on some decision for all the group? If not, just the active people will decide. So I was thinking how to include like this sort of General Assembly within the bubble of the group that are working in the movement.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I kind of alluded to that when I was saying, people from, I don't know, I had that thought because I'm so familiar with it from working with similar organizations. So let's see, where do I start? Yes, so kind of the point that you're pointing out is that this is giving decision-making power to the people who are involved, who are doing things like decision-making by the people who are associated together, not the person who's also on the mailing list but doesn't do a thing, right? Which, personal side comment, I find that a feature, not a bug, because it's so tricky to have people just walk in and say, this should all be done differently. But of course, they know relevant things, right? And of course, if it's a movement, it has to work for them as well, even though they might not be actively participating in the circle. So what is done quite a bit is that you can have things like town hall meetings, or whatever you might call them, all member meetings. And like, for example, in my community, although decisions are made in circles, once a month, everybody who wants to gets together, and then there might be a circle presenting like, membership circle might do a little thing about, hey, we were thinking about increasing the fees. I wonder, or we wonder how that lands on you. What do you think we should think about that? Or you can have kind of series about the things that your organization is about, right? So we often conflate, in my point of view, the there's the work of running the organization. That's often done, that can be done sociocratically, but there's also the having a speaker series about the thing that we care about. And then people can participate by being part of the discussion, but they don't have to figure out how the mailing list works. So there's kind of the operational part and there's the thematic part of the organization. So anyway, one can, there's a lot of additional pieces that plug into it easily. And one of that is including the many member voices.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Noemi.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. I was thinking several questions too, but let's start with the first one. In a conflict situation, for example, if one group has gone a bit rogue, and if you need mutual consent to take decisions, how does the rest of the group, or how does the general group influence the problematic circle? How do you get to like make progress if there is one circle that is really blocking the situation?
Well, the good thing is that they can't be blocking all that much because all they can block is themselves, right? They can't. So there's there's a little bit of damage control already built in. That's a little comment, right? Because they can only block their own decisions. Of course, it can still be super annoying and disruptive for the organization. It's a good idea. It's kind of another one of those modules, just like better communication and better information flow. We also think better conflict resolution is another module that kind of needs to be clicked in with governance. It is a good idea from my point of view to have something like a conflict resolution circle. Most groups that I work in have that. The other piece is that you have built in your support system as well, because as I said earlier, if a circle, there's drama in a circle, then there's a parent circle, right? And just like if two siblings are fighting for a while, and as a parent, you look, you watch it, and at some point you intervene and say, hey, circle, get your act together. What is needed here, right? Because they would hear about it. So you're not alone, right? You're always kind of tied into your support system as a circle. But sometimes people still shy away from intervening somewhere else, and then having a conflict resolution group is a good idea. Kind of in the combination, it typically works. Jack again.
So just on the last point, would the facility to deal with the potential for someone to be bullied be dealt with by the parent group? Let's say this in the decision-making circle, if there's someone that feels no one's ever taking on board what they're saying, and they feel that it might be due to personal dislike or they're dissimilar to the rest of the group, how is that managed? Would they go to the parent circle and say, hey, can you intervene and sort of do something? How would that work?
Well, there would be different levels of escalation, I would say. The first one is, so if we're already at that point, then there would have already been several things that would have been missed. So for example, this is a general commitment to feedback. So every meeting ends with a meeting evaluation, for example. And if people are well trained, they also understand what that means. That it means that if you don't say, after 6 months that you've been dissed the whole time, but how about you speak up the first time, right? Catching things before they become patterns is kind of one of the things. So if it's a pattern, for sure, speak to them. The next thing is you can put the dynamic onto the agenda and say, hey, I'm not feeling safe here. Can we talk about that? The next thing is you can talk to your leader, or that could be the next thing. It depends on which way you want to do it. And if so most of the conflict or the situation should already been addressed by that moment, but then yes, then you can go to the next higher circle, or to whatever conflict resolution circle and so on. But the intention is more to invest more in prevention. Like, you know, rounds prevent conflict, consent prevents conflict, checkouts prevent that people even feel left out in the first place. So it's not a strong, sociocracy is not an answer to active conflict. It's an answer to governance that leads to conflict, you know? So it's more in the prevention camp, not in the resolution camp.
My second question was, again, I get these are kind of like shock horror scenarios. It might not happen all the time. But what happens when, let's say, the leader and the delegate are friends and they kind of have a specific vision for the circle, and they end up sort of communicating a vision in the parent circle that perhaps isn't actually agreed by the circle beneath them?
That can happen. Typically there's enough kind of interchange and so on that it is rare that every person is just in one circle. There's typically a little bit of mixing, and then that would come out. They would also have to, it's typically not the case that they're big surprises. So typically everything is kind of more on an incremental trajectory. So then they would have to do that for quite a while, and including for, you know, keep their terms long and all. So it's possible. It's possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible. That's true.
Okay, thanks, Ted.
Jolie, and then Noemi again.
I don't know how much time we have, so maybe when you have to go, let us know.
Yeah, how about we do the two of you, because I do want you guys to practice, because in my experience, there's a lot of kind of, it's the embodied practice that's very different from the thinking about. So I want you to have a sense of that.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But maybe I misunderstood, but the leader is also the facilitator, or they are two different persons?
No, the leader can be the facilitator. It's kind of the way the way we think about it is it's like having hats, and you can wear two hats. You can be the leader hat and the facilitator hat, but it's two very different skill sets. Actually, that very same person that I quoted earlier, my neighbor, who is the perfect leader of a circle, he sucks as a facilitator. He's just really not a good facilitator. He kind of constantly forgets that he's facilitating and so on. So, you know, he's excellent at project management and making sure, you know, the painter is called and this and that gets fixed. He's not so good in the meeting context. So, you know, he's a great participant, but he's not the one who I would want to hold the process. So these are different skill sets, but sometimes the leader is the great facilitator and people don't mind that it's a lot of power in one person. So it's totally something the group can choose and can have a conversation about. Whatever you consent to, you do.
Okay, thanks. Another little thing, because I'm in this support group now that is now the center where like also economic decisions are coming. And we would like to decentralize, but if I imagine, it's good that every group, the activist group, the group that was the support group of the conferences, the group that want to do the media and the website, that ask for a budget, I don't know, but every group could ask more than what we have as money, and there is like this conflict about money. So the role of the family group, the general group, the core circle will be to put together these things and to try to find a consensus. So, but is it, in your experience, because when you touch, some money that goes to the people, how can, can be discussed if there is not a aim, you say, it's better to communicate, it's better to do conferences, it's better to do activism, everything is important, and how can we have a consensus on the aim, in these decisions?
Yeah, that's really, really hard. I know it's really hard. especially in this. So I guess just to add to the things that you're worried about, what I see also is that people, as you're saying, everything is important, right? And what do you do with finite resources? So you need to make choices. So my answer to that is developing a strategy that you have consent on, so that then you have something that guides your your budget decisions, because you can't do everything. Ultimately, there are different ways of bringing together budget and sociocracy. You can have, for example, as it sounds like you're thinking, you can kind of have the general circle or whatever the counterpart, make sure that the budget aligns with what you have. There are other ways of doing it. So yeah, but ultimately, I'm not. Well, this is partially a sociocracy question. Partially, it's just every group struggles with that, right? Of how do you make these choices when you want to do everything? The unique piece about sociocracy around that is that you have the decentralized situation, and that you have even more a little bit of that everybody's kind of focused on their own thing kind of effect. But then ideally, because you have these circles where people come together, you would have more of a situation where people understand what each other are doing and a willingness to integrate that. But I think ultimately the direct answer to your question is, I think one needs an approved shared strategy that guides spending. Because the strategy is the different, so the aims and the domains are basically, yeah, in a perfect world, we do all these things. But now you add a constraint of constrained resources. Now you need to make choices. And then a strategy is a document, or the whatever, the sense making, the decision that then is the underpinning for those choices. So you still need these things, just that you need to make them in a decentralized, more integrated, participatory way. You can't have one person write the strategy properly. Anyway, that's all I can say. I mean, the rest is a deeper conversation, I think.
No, thank you very much. And I think also this strategic document could be discussing the General Assembly group also, not to make it more respected, or have a wide mandate, or something like that, no?
Mm-hmm. There we are, eh? You withdrew your question? All right.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, maybe we can wrap up.
Yes. Do you want me to show you the exercise? And then yes. So let's see. I actually am sharing a document with you. Those are the slides that I used. And I'm going to screen share really quick so people can see it. So what I want you to do is a very straightforward consent process. So after I leave, I would want you to maybe go into 2 small groups or something, because when it's a large group, it's not as much fun. But let's say we have this session together. So we're making the decision about this session, where the goal is experiencing tools and practices from sociocracy or something like that. That's what you signed up for here, kind of. And then you have the proposal that everybody keeps their camera on. Not because I want that, just because it's a really good example. So you would have one person be the facilitator. You could pick the oldest or youngest or something like that, to be super pragmatic about it for now. That person just makes sure the proposal is understood. And for simplicity, let's say the person who facilitates is also at the same time the person who brought the proposal. That doesn't have to be that way, but it's easier to play that way. Then you do 1 round of reactions. What do you think about this proposal? And asking each person one by one, what do you think? And then ask, do you consent or do you object? If somebody objects, they would need to say how this proposal to keep the cameras on is negatively impacting our ability to experience tools and practice. So you can't just say, no, I don't want it. You will have to say, no, that's not going to work well, because it negatively impacts our ability to do this. It is the top slide, I think, or something like that. Second slide. So, and then I left some, because I knew I wouldn't be here. Actually, I left on the second slide, or on the slide here, moved them at the top. a bunch of typical questions that come up that you can read the answers to in our little FAQ section. So that's what I've got. You
Many
can send me,
thanks.
you can send me an email after about how it went.
Thank you very much. For me, it was wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Grazie.
Thank you. Yes.